Hello everybody, my name's Andrew Gray. I'm the founder of Truth Legal Solicitors of Harrogate in Leeds, and today I'm going to talk to you about a career in law. Okay, so Truth Legal, I should explain, is primarily a David versus Goliath law firm. By that I mean we tend to act for the little people who are enforcing their legal rights against stronger opponents. I also run, in my spare time, the Harrogate District Consensus, which is a political tech project. I also run two other tiny little companies. I host a Harrogate podcast. I also blog quite a lot as well. For my sins, I'm married to a lawyer. We've got 2 kids. But I have a confession for you all at the start of this. When I grow up, and I still don't feel grown up, I still don't know what I want to do with my life. So if you don't know what you want to do with your life, you're in very good company with me. For me, life is all about the journey and not about the destination. My talk today is a collection of true stories that happened to me, interspersed with lots of questions I'm going to pose to you. So listen, these stories have shaped my life and have shaped my legal career. In one of my stories, right at the end, I'm going to explain why it is I'm sitting down here delivering this talk to you and why I've pre-recorded it, just in case. Now then, my first story, true story. Let me take you to the 15th of August, 2005. Now that was my first day on the job as a lawyer. More precisely, I was a trainee solicitor. Now I was doing a training contract, which is essentially 2 years of being a trainee solicitor at a large Manchester firm, and I'm from Manchester. My first day on the job had gone really well. Although, of course, I was petrified going into it, as you can imagine. Now, that evening, sort of buzzing, the day hadn't gone so well, I started my career. I drove to Manchester Piccadilly Station, which I knew very well, because I was going to collect my girlfriend, and she's now my wife. And I parked opposite the station. I left my border collie dog in the car. And I should say I was wearing, not this, I was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, and I really didn't look like a lawyer. I jogged across the road, heading to the station in a great mood. But as I did so, a car pulled up and this big guy got out. And instead of walking towards the station entrance, which I thought he would do, he walked straight towards me. And I got the sense that I was in peril. As our paths crossed, he slammed me to the floor and put his fist in my face. It was like a scene from a movie. "You're under arrest," he said. Wow. Stunned, and my heart was pounding. My mind was, spinning, as you can imagine. I said, "Where's your ID? Where's your ID? Why arrest me?" He said nothing. And then, eventually he said, "I'm going to put you in a van." Menacingly, he kept looking up and down the street. So I came to the only logical conclusion that you could do, which is I was being kidnapped. So I offered him my wallet, my phone, my car keys, even with my dog in the car. But he wasn't interested, so I was being kidnapped in my head. So I had no choice. I had to do something about it. Now somehow, I don't know how I did it, I managed to wrestle him off me. In the process, I lost my shoes, I lost my wallet, my phone and my keys. I was barefoot and I just ran as fast as I could because I was a good runner. I was screaming, "Call the police, call the police." Now, at that time of night in Manchester, there was no one around, no one's coming to my rescue. So I kept running and I turned left under a really massive bridge, running. And then I hid where these 2 bridges sort of met and there was a little gap for me to hide. And when the coast was clear after about 10 minutes, I started running again and I found these 2 heroes, these 2 Royal Mail workers, and they were cleaning vans at that time of night. And I was covered in blood and I was barefoot and they must have thought, "Wow, what the heck's happened to him?" Anyway, I asked them to call the police, which they did. Very quickly, 2 police officers zoomed in an unmarked police car, and I told them my story. Once I'd been convinced that they were police officers and they'd shown me their ID, they put me in their van, or their car, and I told them my story, and they agreed with me that it must be a kidnapping, or an attempted kidnapping. So they radioed the headquarters to report the incident, and we returned to the location where I was attacked to hunt for my attacker. Now, scouring the streets late at night, we came across 2 police officers who had just arrested a 20-something-year-old bloke. Now, he was similar in age to me, similar in build to me. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt. So the two police officers in my car, they got out to find out what had happened. A few minutes later, they returned and they explained to me that there'd just been, or a few minutes before, an armed robbery in the area, and that the man who had assaulted me was in fact an off-duty British transport police officer, would you believe? And he was trying to make an arrest. He thought that me, Andrew Gray, a lawyer, was an armed robber. It was all a case of mistaken identity. Ha ha ha. But turning midnight, I demanded that my attacker, this police officer, return back to the station, because I think he'd gone home, believe it or not. When he returned back to the station, he shook my hand and he apologised to me in front of his senior officer. He explained that he thought that I had a gun or a knife. But when I asked him in front of his senior officer, like, why didn't you show me your ID? I wouldn't have fought, I wouldn't have fled, we would have resolved things. He had the gall to deny that I had asked for his ID. Why else did I offer you my belongings, I said. Hardly the actions of your typical armed robber. Now, after only a few hours sleep, I was bloodied and battered and dazed, as you can imagine. I started my second day as a lawyer, a personal injury lawyer at the time. So, budding law student, I have some questions for you. I want you to answer them in your heads. If you had been me, would you have sued the police for the injuries? I didn't sue, actually. Would you have done? Second of all, had you been a lawyer then, and I'd asked you to represent me, would you have represented me in a claim for compensation against the police force? Third, had that police officer been charged with the assault on me, would you have represented him in the magistrate's court? And fourth, had the police officer lost his job for his actions, would you have represented him as his lawyer in an employment tribunal? Now, that awful experience gave me 3 key instrumental insights. First of all, people in power, they lie. Think Boris Johnson over Partygate. For me, lawyers are required to keep the powerful in check. Number 2, witnesses, as I was then, have false memories. When I explained to the senior officer what I remembered happening to me, and he'd also seen this on CCTV, I said that the attacker, this police officer, got out of a green coupe car. But this was not so. The car wasn't green, and it wasn't a coupe, and I think I got the model and make of it all wrong. Of course I wasn't lying. There was nothing for me to gain by getting it wrong. But even if, like an hour later, an honest witness like me had a false memory. And you should always remember that people have false memories, and I suspect you will have false memories too. Third key lesson is, as a lawyer who's represented hundreds, if not thousands, of injured people, I totally understand that the psychological or mental distress of an incident is often more debilitating than the physical effects. And I know, because I developed an anxiety disorder, which led me to move away from the city to Harrogate, and I wouldn't be here in Harrogate with a law firm had that police officer not done what he did. So it was a gift. Anyway, rewinding, let's go back in time again. I bet you'll want to know what grades I got in my GCSEs. You know, our lawyer's super smart. Well, my grades were above average, but they were not outstanding. For A-levels, I took geography, classics and business studies. Again, my grades were probably above average, but not spectacular. I couldn't have gone to Oxbridge on those A-levels. For my degree, what did I study? I followed my passion, which was and remains politics. More precisely, my degree was PPE, Politics, Philosophy and Economics. So I don't have a proper law degree, and I'm a lawyer running a law firm. For university, I got my first choice, which was Manchester University. It was the best one closest to where I lived, and I got a 2-1, not first, I got a 2-1. Let me tell you another true and shocking story which shaped my life. This is a bit of a sad one. In 2001, 1 week before I was due to graduate from Manchester University, my best mate, whom I'd lived with for 3 years, he was crossing the street at night with his mates after a night out. Unbeknown to him, some kids with a criminal record as long as your arm, had just stolen a car, had taken a load of drugs, and they were driving as fast as they could round this town, determined to knock anybody over. They murdered my best mate. They hit him at 65 miles an hour in a 30 zone. He died instantly. A few days later, obviously traumatised, I went to the murder scene, the crime scene. Next to the shrine of flowers which had developed, police forensics officers had painted little white circles on the road where they'd found various parts of my friend and his possessions. Thankfully, these amazing police officers eventually caught the 3 killers, because they'd run away and they were found like about 4 weeks later or something. I attended the trial. Each of the 3 killers had their own solicitor and they had their own barrister. In total, 6 lawyers defending them. My friend's family, on the other hand, was represented by the Crown Prosecution Service's lawyers, essentially the state's lawyers. After the trial, which I think was about 3 or 4 days, maybe 5 days, the jury convicted the 3 of them of death by dangerous driving, not murder, although I still regard it as murder, and they were sentenced to 8 years in prison. So some more questions for you budding law students. Each of the defendants had 2 lawyers. Could you, if you'd been a lawyer, defended them in the knowledge that they were all, in all likelihood, guilty? A supplemental question to that, could you have shaken their hands when you came to meet them in the cells? Second of all, do you believe that every person deserves access to the very best legal advice, regardless of what it is that they are dealing with? Even murderers, child murderers. Thirdly, had you been working for the Crown Prosecution Service, essentially acting for my friend's family, do you think you would have derived any professional satisfaction from securing that conviction? All right, let's go back again. So after my politics degree, and after that horrible death, I went travelling, which I thoroughly recommend. And then I set up a political organisation. I then worked as a classroom assistant, would you believe it, to see if I wanted to become a teacher. No way. So I was probably 22 and still not knowing what I wanted to do. Teaching was tough, I can tell you. More stressful than law, I'd say. Then in a moment of absolute honest introspection, I realised that I had some personal flaws which I really needed to correct if I wanted to get into politics. First, that I was just way too shy, incapable of giving any presentation like this one. Second, I felt intellectually disorganised, and I knew that I couldn't really get anywhere with a mind like that. It needed sharpening. Now, I knew that some of the best politicians in the world had been lawyers. Therefore, law was my answer. Lawyers help people, and politicians try to help people, but perhaps on a more macro, bigger scale. So, budding law students, another set of questions from me. Can you name any famous lawyer politicians? Can you? Here are mine. Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela, Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, Joe Biden, Kamala Harris, Tony Blair, and essentially the Deputy Prime Minister, Dominic Raab, who is a solicitor. In fact, Dominic Raab, I think, represented Tony Blair in a case a long time ago. We should think that all of us, whether you're interested in law or not, what is it about law that creates so many politicians? Now, for me, I think there's 5 reasons. First of all, lawyers tend to be intellectually capable. We're not brain scientists or brain surgeons, but, we're not intellectual duffers either. Second of all, lawyers tend to have brilliant, exceptional communication skills, both written and oral. Third, I think lawyers tend to be united by wanting to make the world a better place, actually, by helping people. Fourth, lawyers, I can tell you, we are ambitious and we are competitive. Fifth, we are conscientious, we work hard. Absolutely. You don't have to be that smart to be a lawyer, but you definitely have to work hard once you're there and to get there. And sixth, and maybe you won't agree with me about this, not everybody does, but this is my thought. Practicing law gives you a deep insight into human nature, because we go face to face with the very best and the worst of humanity. We have to shake the hands of murderers at cells. We have to see humans do the most awful and wonderful things to each other, and we see it up close and personal and confidentially so. Now, secretly, I suspect that some of you will think, well, anyone who can represent and shake hands with a murderer must be capable of grand deception and therefore perfectly suited to politics. But I can tell you that's not been my experience of lawyers. So going back, with my head rather than my heart set on law, I undertook what's called the postgraduate diploma in law at York Law School. I can tell you, folks, it was the most intellectually difficult year of my life. You cram 3 years of a law degree into 1 year. Wow. People call this the law conversion course. On that course, I mixed with the most fascinating people with degrees in a range of eclectic subjects, united with the single desire to become a lawyer. After that year, with essentially a law degree under my belt, I had to decide whether I wanted to become a solicitor or a barrister. Of course, I opted for the solicitor route and don't regret it. But what are the differences between a solicitor and a barrister? You might not know. There are far more solicitors than barristers. I think there's around 135,000 of us, but only 15,000 barristers. Simply, barristers tend to do more work in the courts. They stand up in court. They make their arguments, they cross-examine witnesses and knock them around a bit intellectually. A bit like we might have seen in the Johnny Depp trial. Solicitors tend to have sort of intimate, lengthy, close relationships with clients, often for years at a time. Solicitors, like me, we instruct barristers when things get really complicated or when it goes to court. And the solicitors, we have more paperwork to do. Barristers, I'd say, it's not always true, they tend to be more intellectual, a bit more Oxbridgey, more flamboyant. Barristers tend to be self-employed, working in groups called chambers. Solicitors, we tend to work at law firms like Truth Legal. Judges, now judges are the most senior of us lawyers. They tend to come from the ranks of the barrister, less so than the solicitor, even though there's far fewer barristers than solicitors. So other than the division between solicitors and barristers, what other divisions are there that you really ought to know about if you're thinking about a career in law? They are as follows. There's people either practice criminal law or people practice civil law. Most lawyers practice civil law, not criminal law, in fact. Lawyers tend to either do sort of court work, called litigation, or transactional work like drafting contracts and working on corporate deals and so on. And lawyers usually either choose to act for individuals, like Truth Legal does, or for businesses. Now, the number of areas of law is way too long to list, because there's an area of law to govern every area of human interaction. But some examples of the variety, and there is a lot of variety, are, well, there's human rights law, there's international law, family law, so divorce law, charity law, military law, environmental law, immigration, banking, crypto, defamation, and many other areas of law. But lawyers tend to only specialise in one or two areas. You can't know it all. Let me tell you another story. After qualifying as a solicitor in Manchester, I moved to Leeds. There I worked for a law firm, big muscular law firm that was acting for large businesses. I hated that experience, but I'm really grateful for it. I was a commercial litigation solicitor, which meant that, in simple terms, I was suing individuals on behalf of my business clients for money. Vividly, one day I recall a case where I had to evict, on behalf of my business client, a young family from where they lived because they owed my client thousands of pounds. Just as the bailiffs were knocking on the door to evict the family, the mother telephoned me and she cried and she begged me to call off the bailiffs, but I couldn't. I wasn't instructed to by my client. I cried secretly at my desk, possibly the only time I've ever done that as a lawyer. So I have some more questions for you budding lawyers. Could you act for a business to evict a family from a property when they owed your client thousands of pounds? Could you? Nothing wrong with that. I did it. It needed doing. Or would you rather have defended the family from the eviction? Back to my journey. So after acting for that business world, I then started working at one of the biggest law firms in the country, where I was acting for trade unions, lots of teachers, and I enjoyed it very much. But then I decided to set up my own law firm, and I was at the time one of the most junior lawyers ever to have set up a law firm in this country. I'm very proud of that. For me, it was one of the best decisions of my life. But why has Truth Legal got that silly name? Well, I'm a Quaker, which is a religious group associated with Christianity. Famous Quakers you might have heard of include Lloyds from Lloyds Bank, Barclays from Barclays Bank, and Cadbury's of the Cadbury's chocolate dynasty. There's lots of others as well. But Quakers, we tend to believe in 5 sort of core areas, really 5. We tend to be pacifists, although I'm not. We tend to be environmentalists. We believe in equality, simplicity and truth, i.e. we speak the truth. Hence Truth Legal. I wanted my law firm and my career to embody my values. So general advice to you, anyone watching this, is whether you choose law or not, I'd let your values, not your parents' values, guide you in your decision making. But why am I sitting down and pre-recording this presentation for you? Simply because I've been quite poorly this last year or so. I don't need any sympathy, but it's true. I've gone from running marathons and playing lots of football to becoming disabled as defined in the Equality Act. Why have I become disabled? Because in my lifetime, I've had to take lots of very strong antibiotics, which have actually saved my life. But unbeknown to me, unbeknown to the doctors here in the UK, big pharmaceutical companies in the United States who manufactured these antibiotics were getting heavily sued by lawyers because of some of the nasty side effects that the drugs had given to people. But yet these drugs were still getting sold in the UK. Eventually, here in the UK, we more or less banned them, but by that time the damage to me and to other people had been done. So I have some questions for you that come from this. Would you represent someone like me as a lawyer in a claim for compensation against big pharmaceutical companies who are worth billions, if not trillions, who have their legions of very expensive lawyers? Could you act for someone like me in a case like that? Would you enjoy it? But also, the boots on the other foot, imagine. Could you see yourself as the expensive lawyer, acting for the big pharmaceutical companies, defending those claims? After all, antibiotics have saved hundreds of millions of lives. They do far more good than they do damage. And surely every business and every person deserves amazing legal representation. What do you think? Tricky, eh? Now let me finish with some real, just general advice for people considering a career in law. First of all, ask yourself, can you really excel at something if you're not passionate about it? I'd be inclined to follow your passions. Second of all, law is a tough job with a great deal of stress. So if you want an easy life, don't do law. However, teaching, other professions, and frankly most jobs, are hard too, with lots of stress. Third, if you like helping people, law could be for you. Law and politics to me are similar, all about helping people. Lawyers help people and organisations come through the most difficult situations imaginable. Politicians create those laws that we apply. Fourth, I recommend that you let your life speak. You've only got one and you've no idea how long you've got left on planet Earth. Realise it's about the journey, not the destination. The police officer attacked me, gave me a gift. My law firm now specialises in assault cases because I understand them. My friend who was murdered on the road, well, we deal with road traffic accidents. We understand that. And if you cry at your desk because you've just evicted a family from their house, well, you know that that area of law isn't for you. Finally, final piece of advice is, if I were you, be very familiar with technology. Law, nearly all other careers are going to radically change because of technology. So be prepared to keep reinventing yourself throughout your career. Law tech, mark my words, will bring access to justice to millions of people. Whereas only one lawyer can help one client at a time, law tech is going to be transformative. So there we are. They're my thoughts on a career in law. If I'm there in person with you, I'll take some questions. You can ask cheeky ones like how much do lawyers earn and all that. But if you're watching this at home, pre-recorded, well, I don't mind you pinging me a few emails and I'll do my best to answer them. Email me at andrewg@truthlegal.com, and I wish you all the very best with your careers. Thank you very much.